need to reinvent your population and therefore your workforce is a birth rate of 2.1. Now, only an economist can come up with a number like 2.1. Like, seriously, what is 0.1 of a person? Now, I know some people right now might be thinking, I'll work with that 0.1 of a person. And some of you may well even be thinking, I have a family member who is 0.1 of a person, in terms of their perhaps contribution. And they generally are the person who you think, man, I don't know about that person. They really upset me easily. So, when you look at birth rates, 2.1, every Western economy has a birth rate below 2.1 now. Every Western economy. And I've looked at this across 50 countries, including the USA, where the birth rate fell below 2.1 in December 2006. In Australia, we are paying particular attention to the ageing population because our birth rate fell below 2.1 in 1976. And it has never been above 2.1 since. We have effectively grown our population through migration. Now, if you want to know what's happening in your region, think about this. These are the countries with birth rates below 2.1. Thailand, 1.6. Taiwan, 1.4. Hong Kong, 1. China, 1.1. Singapore, 1.2. Korea, North Korea, 2. South Korea, 1.5. New Zealand, 1.4. And every country in Europe has a birth rate below 2.1. And I find it mildly amusing that in the home of Catholicism, Italy, the birth rate is now 0.6. Isn't that interesting? In the next decade, 60 million workers will retire in Europe. 60 million. So when we talk about youth unemployment and unemployment due to the global financial crisis across Europe, I go, if you wait less than a decade, it'll actually rectify itself through natural aging. The only countries that have a birth rate above 2.1 are Malaysia at 2.5, the Philippines at 2.7, and India at 2.2. And that number has come down from 2.4 at the start of the last decade. Isn't that interesting? So what that means is all of those countries with a birth rate below 2.1 have an ageing population and therefore an ageing workforce. And we have to ask ourselves, how do we keep older workers, i.e. baby boomers, in the workplace? And how do we change the stereotypes that we attach to each generation? Baby boomers are resistant to change and can't use technology. I love change, but I'm happy to admit I can't use technology. I'm still constantly amused or frustrated by my iPhone. Generation X, open to change but sceptical of authority. Generation Y, restless and want to be promoted tomorrow or want the jobs of Gen Xers tomorrow. Now, for all the Gen Xers in the room who think that, get over yourself. Gen Y are not going to stay long enough to take your job. Because I also want you to think about this in the context of baby boomers who, if there's slight deviations between the research done in Australia and the US, who, by the way, are the two countries doing the most research and have continued to do the most research in the generational space for the last 20 years. And what you find is there's about a 2 or 3 year difference. You can pick where you want to be. You don't need my permission. But if you look at what we do across Australia, New Zealand, and the stuff that we've done across Asia, we say baby boomers are 50 to 67, 68. 69 and over are the veterans, sometimes known as the silent generation. And then Generation X are the people aged 33 through to 49, Gen Y is 19 or 18 through to about 32, right? Baby boomers think in 5 to 10 year cycles in terms of their career and career progression. Gen X think in 3 to 5 year cycles. A Gen Y thinks in a 2 year cycle if they are happy. If they are unhappy, anywhere between 8 days and 3 months. And what our research has shown is that because of globalisation and technology, there are far more similarities right around the world where generations have access to technology. There are far more similarities across Gen Y than there are differences. Cultural difference plays a part in Gen X and baby boomers and obviously veterans, but far less so for Gen Ys. And so in setting that context, I'll draw your attention to one more thing in terms of birth rates. The world's population hit 7 billion in November 2012. It will reach 9 billion by the year 2050. Here's the scary thing. All of that growth for global companies, all of that growth will happen in the 50 poorest countries in the world, and 25% of that growth will happen on the continent of Africa, where at present we have 10 countries with a population exceeding 100 million. By the year 2050, there will be 16 countries in Africa with a population in excess of 100 million. And somewhere between 25 and 30% of many of those countries have HIV or AIDS. So if you're working in infrastructure, so we're talking engineering, construction, if you're working in health, healthcare and aged care, if you're working in mining, if you're working in education, you will have work for the rest of your lives. But bear in mind that the people who are going to come to you looking for resources are going to be in those countries where the greatest growth is going to happen. So if you think at present talent management, recruitment and retention is a challenge, strap yourselves in because you're in for a big ride over the next 2 decades. So it now gives me pleasure to introduce our 2 guest speakers, and I'm going to trot over here because I thought I had my notes, but I don't. You have the directions to the airport if anyone has them. I can tell you who you can book your travel and accommodation through. The speaker checklist, and so far I'm on track. And I know who to call in an emergency. Well, I'm very embarrassed now because I'm going to have to ask the absolutely fabulous Janet from Cisco to introduce herself. Luckily, we've had a chat. Janet runs a very large technical area for the Asia-Pac region. Has spent some time also, she was telling me, in Australia, and has her family living in the US. So she actually gets the multicultural piece of diversity, but works for Cisco, who I was chatting to her before saying, I think do some of the most extraordinary change management and HR work that I've ever seen as an HR professional. And one of the things that I admire about Cisco is their ability to communicate the importance of change and taking their people on the journey with them. So she's going to tell you a little bit about the generational journey of Cisco. So thanks, Janet.
Thank you, Avril. That was an excellent setup. Lots of good stats, and I saw many people taking notes, so food for thought in the future. I'm Janet Rainey. I do run technical services for the region. I've been with Cisco for 16 years. Of those 16 years, I've spent a few of them here in Asia Pacific. So from 2005 to 2008, I was based in Sydney for the region, and I recently returned at the beginning of this year. Part of my family lives in Singapore, and our older daughters, who are part of Gen Y, live in the United States with their husband, partner, and our grandchild. So what I'm going to speak to you today is relevant not only from a leadership perspective of a large part of the business supporting global customers here in the region, but also from a personal perspective, trying to relate to 4 or 5 generations, if I include include our youngest daughter, the digital natives, below age 18, as Avril was telling us. And we look at how by 2020, when those children start entering the workforce as well, we have yet another generational force on our hands. Well, let's see what we've got. These aren't my slides.
I promise I didn't touch the laptop.
It's all right. We'll figure it out.
With your technical background.
I think we go. My technical background, we can go all the way to here. We go. I'll admit it's probably my fault because I changed a couple slides before the session started. I really don't want to talk to you. I want to talk with you because I'm not here to say that what I know or present and what Cisco does is the beginning and end of managing generational diversity. We're learning, as you are learning in your own companies, how to do this as we go along. But we spend a lot of time thinking about and educating our managers and having the dialogue with all employees about how to do this better. Because we do recognize that the Generation Y coming into the workforce is a disruption, but also a huge opportunity to tap talent and passion if we get it right. So at a leadership level within the company, each of our managers has a goal around diversity and inclusion that does include a generational component. And that is the beginning, not at all the end of our commitment there. I thought I'd start with a little light humor. Because sometimes when we talk across generations, it does feel like we're speaking different languages, or worse, we're not speaking at all. You know, we're sending a text when somebody's expecting an email. We're picking up the phone or expecting a phone call when somebody's trying to Snapchat or WhatsApp us. And that those miscommunications and misset expectations are the beginning of, a not good basis for trust and collaboration between our working teams. So we see that every day within the business, and having a conversation about what we expect, how we expect it, and who likes to consume information in what way has been a really important part of this journey. On a personal note, as I was telling Avril before, within our own family, our older daughters, my husband, why don't they ever call? Why do they never call me? I'm like, they don't call anybody. They don't use the telephone feature of an iPhone. It's not a phone, it's a small computer, and they like to text and Snapchat and WhatsApp and Instagram. Get a text plan. You'll be able to communicate. So it's knowing who and how. On the other end of the spectrum, my 87-year-old mother-in-law likes to talk on the phone, but it's too expensive. Doesn't want to talk on the phone because it's expensive, but doesn't like email either because she's afraid her spelling's not good enough. Yes, there's a spell checker. She texts through Words with Friends. The only way she communicates with anybody is through the chat feature on Words with Friends. So communication can work in many ways. It's a matter of opening that dialogue about how people want to communicate and then being adaptable and flexible. So we know about the traditionals, the baby boomers, Gen X, and millennials. This is kind of a rough guide that we give our leadership team to think about it. But as with all things, as you get towards, towards the edges, people overlap a bit more. In our business and technology, most of the traditionals have left the workforce. So most of the traditionals, there are a few exceptions, but that is a very small population in our industry. What we see, however, is that we've got a very large population of baby boomers because of the economic downturns since 2007, 2008. That expectation that we had of a retiring group of individuals did not come to pass. People stayed in the workforce longer to keep filling their retirement coffers. And so we see about twice the number of baby boomers as we have Generation X in the business. And then about twice the number of millennials as we have Generation X. So two big populations on the side of a smaller population. So Generation X is generally expected to be that generation that takes over from the baby boomers when we expect by around 2020 that they will start migrating out of the workforce or migrating into a different type of working environment, more of a part-time, taking different roles, possibly stepping down from some of the larger leadership roles to focus on individual contribution and subject expertise. That flexibility is what we want to do to keep people engaged in the business and tap their deep expertise, but to do it in the right way that allows them the flexibility, potentially working on less than a full-time schedule, remotely, from home, off schedule, off shift. Those type of requirements are something the baby boomers find very attractive, and we're trying to engage them in the workforce using. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the millennials, who have come from that environment that has been shaped by the commercialization of IT. So all of the apps that you can get on your iPhone that are free or 99 cents through the App Store have set an expectation for how our work systems need to behave, how they need to look, how easy they need to be to use, and how quickly they can change. Anyone who works in or works with corporate IT knows that our traditional systems lack that flexibility. So one of the things we see from our millennials is an intense dissatisfaction and unwillingness to accept the slow progress of IT change. So their demands and their experiences, frankly, with technology that have come up through the universities and through their own personal use are really driving change in how we work. Bring your own device to work, working on multiple devices, working interactively through chat features, collaborative environments, shared work experiences, knowledge management platforms that allow for gamification of the workflow. These are all things that we have had to really accelerate building into our systems, particularly in technical services, where we have over 3,500 engineers. Of those 3,500 engineers, about 70% of them are Gen Y. So they have really driven a different experience, and we have had to then get the communication between those engineers, the ones who are in the Generation X, and the subject expert often are distinguished engineers who are in the baby boomer category. And I'll tell you more about a couple programs that we have that do that. The thing about the changing demographics that is an opportunity and a threat, particularly an opportunity if you're a company who does this well and are hiring, is that more than a third of the Gen Xers are not satisfied and they're hoping to leave their company. Whereas the baby boomers feel like they need to work till they drop at least 40% of them because they don't have enough retirement savings to live in the way that they wish to live throughout their active retirement. And within the workforce, you know, this is a number that we see is small compared to the numbers that Avril shared with us. Not 37% of our workforce, but over 50% of our workforce is or will be, and by 2020, a much larger percentage of how we do business. I won't spend too long here, particularly not on the traditionalists, but it's worth taking the view to remember how it is that those of us who've been in the business a little bit longer grew up with the traditionalists, top-down, paternalistic, in terms of, you know, paying your dues and having job security being very high priorities for that generation. I remember that culture clash when I joined IBM a few years before I joined Cisco, and at that time IBM was the employer that was known for being an employer for life. We joined IBM, it was like families were there to stay. So I joined, and people repeatedly on my first day, "Welcome to IBM, you have a job for life." Scared the heck out of me. I was 23. I did not want a job for life. I didn't want to get married to this company. I really just needed a paycheck. So, you know, even then, that difference was quite notable. The baby boomers came in with very different stuff, quite optimistic, but also quite competitive, quite driven by a different reward system than we see in the other generations. So, really, perks, title, money, hierarchy, very important to those baby boomers. So how do you reward and recognize a baby boomer? They want to see a cash reward, they want it to be publicly announced, and they want to be promoted to a job with a significant title. Now, if you contrast that with the millennials, sure, they want to be paid well, but those aren't the things that are important to a millennial. They want interesting work, and oh, by the way, they want balance in their life. They've seen what their baby boomer parents have gone through, And they're not interested in doing that for the next 30 years. Thank you very much. So they want a much flatter structure. They want to be included, they want to be heard, they want their opinions to be valued, and they don't want to have to earn the right to participate and be taken seriously, which often puts them at odds with Generation X. Why? Generation X is a smaller generation who had to pay their dues working for the baby boomers and the traditionals. And and that puts us sometimes at odds with the Generation Y who come in today very full of energy, wanting to be promoted early, recognized often, paid well, and included in decision making from the beginning of their careers, not after they've had a couple years to learn the business, right? So, as Avril was saying, skeptical, our Generation X, but resourceful and valuing freedom and independence, not wanting to be micromanaged. So I'm not going to go into this, but you know, how we communicate, both in form and content, is really important. When we think about being able to get messages out to such a diverse population, baby boomers really need formal communication. So something as simple as a promotion will not be meaningful to a baby boomer if it is not announced in an email publicly. Whereas other groups are not as concerned about that. They'd rather see their achievements noted by their work group, and they'd rather see a rise in their expanded responsibilities rather than a formal title change. So very particular things that we have to think about. In millennials particularly, it is the amount of communication and not formal communication, not necessarily emails, but the ability to interact on chats, online, in communities, with each other, with global peers, and without hierarchy standing in the way, is something that is an expectation. So a great example, I have a leader in China who joined the team. Many of whom, about 60%, are millennial, more now that we've opened a new center. And first thing he did was get on WeChat and set up a WeChat group, and he started posting everything on WeChat. It was everything from, I just finished a marathon, to I met with my boss and here's where we had dinner, to the latest sales numbers. So it was personal, it was important and business relevant, it was congratulating people on the team, it was constant, and the team loved it. In fact, he's set a bar now that the leader who will take that role is going to have an expectation to continue, I would say. So knowing your audience and knowing how to communicate to that audience is really, really important to keeping people engaged and winning not only their minds but their hearts as a leader. So what are we doing at Cisco? I'm going to talk primarily from an Asia-Pacific perspective. There are many, many things when I started to pull this together that are going on across a company of 76,000 people, but I'll talk about a few just from the perspective of then learning from you through our dialogue and questions. What are you doing? What are your best practices? What can I learn? Because again, we have focused a lot on our millennials, and while we have a few programs for our baby boomers, it's something that we're still learning. So we've started some grad programs, and this has been really good for a continuous program over 6 or 7 years since my last time when I was in this region, 2 of our current times, to bring in a structure to your program where we bring in a group of cohort graduates who come in and we rotate them through a variety of jobs. They are hired to work for technical services, not in a specific role, and as they come in, we then figure out, okay, we're going to try you in a technical role, we're going to try you in business roles, we're going to rotate you through different groups until we figure out where your talent most lies and where it matches your passion. And we do that over a 2-year rate, and then they move into a group where they have the best fit. And that has produced some of our best technical leaders because we kept them with us, they grew with us, they got to try new technologies, they got to take positions of leadership earlier in their career than they otherwise would have. And it allowed them to get a view across the entire organization, not just one piece of it, very, very early in their career. In fact, I would say it's something that we should do with many or most of our hires, have a structured rotation program, but it's something that we're still working on across. The other thing that we did is it helped with career development, and we were able to source quite broadly for diversity of gender. We also brought in at one point a site disabled engineer, and we're able to find accommodations to make him quite successful in our center in Sydney. So we really did focus on where can we find the right talent and find them the right fit, and we've had a very good retention rate in a very difficult environment, particularly in the Sydney center, where we've got a lot of competitive threat for attrition. These are some of the places that people have gone from that program. They've become software engineers, technical engineers, system engineers, customer support engineers. We've moved a number of people up through this program and populated, really spread the wealth throughout the organization by doing so. So this is something at the corporate level that Services Academy is now focused on, having early in career intake and being able to emulate this kind of an experience on a much broader level for Cisco, so that we have the ability to bring in not only graduates, but people who've had similar careers in military, technical colleges, and other experiences that make them good entry-level people with a different set of skills that they can bring to the company. Okay. The other piece that I mentioned earlier was our Dalian team. Now this is a millennial example, which we brought together. So it says they're aged from the 80s. I did not hire a bunch of 80-year-olds. I recognized this when I was looking earlier. They were born in the 80s. So everybody in this cohort is on average 24 years old. 110 people. We just stood it up in Dalian, China, to do North Asian language support. And we built this team. It says less than 1 year. We built most of this team in 5 months and transferred work to it. Now, what we had a lot of trouble with was getting gender diversity. So we are 90% male, and we will have to work through on that as we continue to grow the center. But we do have Cantonese, Russian, Japanese, Mandarin, English served out of that center today. What you find, though, is that we've had a really interesting experience there. That the mindset is very short-term focused. So how we've responded is to have a separate benefits, a different structure for our human resources there. Where early in career, for the first 2 grade equivalents, we have kept people as contingent workers so that we can more quickly and flexibly address salary and promotion concerns. That is something we struggled with in our other centers, not being able to promote fast enough to recognize the skill growth in the population. So we fixed that. But we know we need to continue to have a strong pipeline to keep people with us as they achieve and grow. Because there is that self-orientation, we've actually designed a workspace that is collaborative so that we get people out of their own no offices, they're cubes, and they're not assigned. You pick your cube when you come in during the day, and you sit in your work team with collaboration spaces so that we force people to be working together and learning together, not going off alone. And that gets us to have team goals, not just individual goals. But we do see they're less patient, and one of the things our Japanese customers tell us is that the soft skills and the politeness is not enough. So that's an area that we will continue to really invest in, because we want to build our Japanese language support there, and there is a high degree of sensitivity to that. But what we do is have a lot of outside organizations for soccer leagues and different photography clubs, etc., because we find that work-life separation is very strong at that age. People want to play and work and live with the people they also work with. So that's been the other learning we've had. This is about our collaborative workspace. I already told you about that. Last thing I'll leave you with, which is the builders of tomorrow. So how do we get the different organizations to talk to each other? This program really talks talks about taking the most senior engineers we have, the distinguished engineers, and coupling them with our Gen Ys, our millennials, to work together on projects like autonomic computing. So that's one example. Autonomic computing means self-healing or self-managed computing. So networks that manage themselves. It's a bit like science fiction, but we've got people working on it. And we've got distinguished engineers who work with a group of software engineers in Bangalore and a bunch of young field engineers globally to talk about what the requirements would look like, how we could do it, and to put together prototypes that allow us to do this. This is part of their structured work that allows a global effort that connects the experience of the baby boomers with the passion and knowledge of the Gen Ys to try to do something that hasn't been done before. I spoke about this earlier, so I'm not going to cover it off, but I think people issues are addressed by flexible work practices. I've talked about how the baby boomers appreciate it, but if we think about all generations, the ability to work flexibly, part-time, from any location, telecommuting, enabled by technology, and to have that flexible time to work in a global 24/7 world when your global teammates might be online is something that is a strong value and something that we, with our technology, really provide for our own engineers and seek to provide our customers as well. So that's it. And I look forward to hearing from you, not only questions, but ideas about what you do well in this area and to learn from you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Janet. That was really insightful. I particularly enjoyed her comments about status and baby boomers. And I have always noted with some amusement, two of my clients in particular completely emulate how important status is to baby boomers. So one of my clients is a major hospital in Sydney, and whenever you go to the hospital to do some work with the executive team, as a visitor you have to park on level 3, because level 1's for the executives and level 2's for other staff. But when you drive through the car park on level 1, directly opposite the lift, that's really important, where your car space is the car space of the CEO, then the director of medicine, then the director of nursing. And it makes me laugh because I reckon every Gen X and Gen Y who goes past those car spaces are going, losers. And I'm also very fortunate that one of our major clients is the Department of Defence. So I'm a senior advisor to the Chief of Navy, and I'm also a senior advisor, which is very exciting at present, to the Chief of Army. So I'm his advisor on gender, cultural transformation, generations and multiculturalism. And I was saying earlier to Janet, one of the great pleasures I have is that I coach all the brigadiers one-on-one in the Australian Army. And 75% of them are Gen Xers, the remaining 25% are baby boomers. We have 8 generals in the Australian Army, they're all baby boomers, and the Gen Xers can't wait for them to get out of their way so that they can run the Army the way they think it should be run. But head office is in Canberra, and some of you realise that Canberra is the capital city of Australia, and that's where all our government departments are based. And when I go to Defence headquarters, out the front are 4 car spaces that no one is allowed to park in except the people whose titles are painted on it. And it's the Chief of the Australian Defence Force, the Chief of Navy, the Chief of Army, and the Chief of Air Force. So it reinforces those status symbols. And I await the first Gen X to be appointed to one of those positions to see whether the status symbol gets removed. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Lynn Lee, who is the Vice President of HR for Shell Business Operations, and she's going to talk about what they do in their region, and like Janet is also Singapore-based and has responsibility across the region, including, I believe, for China and India as well. So I invite Lynn to talk to you now. Thank you.
So I'm doing the shell way, which is to avoid all the bags and the wires. So I'm going to come in front this way. Thanks, April. Yeah, just a bit about myself. So I am the global HR VP for Shell Business Operations, which is actually about 10% of our Shell staff overall. And in business operations, we have a variety of functions. So that includes procurement, that's to support upstream, to logistics for downstream and upstream, with finance operations, IT, HR services. So it's a whole gamut, and operate in 6 cities. So 3 of it in Asia. We have KL, Manila, and India. And we have 2 in Europe, 1 in Glasgow, 1 in Krakow in Poland, and another center in, what did I miss? How can I miss 1 center? So there's 6. Maybe there's 6, right? It'll come to me. Yeah, so what I'm gonna do is perhaps just to get a sense of how many Gen Y are in this audience. If you're not shy. Alright, okay. So whatever that I say about Gen Y, please don't take it on me, okay? And how many Gen X? I'm a Gen X. Right, okay, majority. And then I guess the rest of you would be baby boomers or aspiring strawberry generation, I guess. You know, that would be similar to people who are born like in the 80s and below. So my younger daughter, who is 14, says that she's from the strawberry generation. So anyway, so I think those statistics were very interesting, and I thought, what else can I share in terms of the experience in Shell? So what I'll do is perhaps share a few anecdotes around what we do in Shell, and perhaps some of these would resonate with you as well. So let me try to see if I have my slides. And as a Gen X, I'm really bad with these types of things. I would be the person who cries, and then a Gen Y would come and help me. I really do, when it comes to IT, I cry when things don't happen. All right, so maybe before this. So I remember that when I joined Shell, that was about 12 years ago, we were in the D&I class, and I looked around, and the first activity that we did was to line ourselves up on the number of years of service that we've had in Shell, right? So it was from 0 to 6 months to 20 to 25 years. So here I was, from a consulting firm for the past 8 years or so, and I had just joined Shell, so I stood here, right, 0 to 6 months. And I thought I would have a few partners around me. But I saw this whole group of people, 15 to 20 years and 25 years, and I thought like, oh my God, that was my first reaction really, because I had never been in an organization where there was anyone who had 20 years in the organization. So that was a revelation. And then the second revelation as I stood there was I looked, and they're all men, mostly men. So I think that was one of the first revelation around, if you have a lot of people who are 20 to 25 years, it means as well that, generation is largely baby boomers, without too much calculation. So we wind back, we wind forward 12 years. So last year, when I took on this role, as the head for Shell Business Operations, I had gone to the center in Poland, right? And I was told a few things. Attrition rate is about 10 to 15%. Right? Our female demographics, 60%, 40% male, 60% female. Very good so far. And recruitment strategy. Now, this is the interesting part. We plan for maternity covers in our recruitment strategy. Again, I was like, wow, I've never heard of that. In all that time in 12 years in Shell, I've never had someone tell me that we plan for maternity cover. So it was such a, it was just, so much part of the way that things work. So much part of the youth of the place that, maternity cover was just like eating. So I think those are the 2 things that really struck me. Yeah, so why am I standing here talking, about these things? there are two parts of Shell, right? So before I took this role, I was in downstream, and in downstream we largely have sales, we have refineries, right? So again, largely men, engineers, people who are sales, who used to be engineers, largely 45 or above, and so you can see already the demographics would be 45 plus, 70 to 75% men, largely European, a few Asians, and what else? Attrition rate of less than 3%. Right? Again, fast forward in the business operations center, 60% female. Yeah. But if you go to the leadership, there's still a bit of problem. But overall, 60% female. Attrition rate of about 10 to 15%. Yeah? And then you have things like maternity cover. So one of the first things that used to be considered a challenge was that in a space like Shell, where it's largely engineering, with energy, when you see attrition rate of 10 to 15%, the question is, this looks like a problem that we have, right? Because we're not used to 10 to 15%, we're used to 3%. Yeah? So it's almost like we have a problem, and guess who's the problem? It's the Gen Y. They're not happy. We have all these women who are not happy. All these people, in all the 6 centers were not happy, and they're 10% of our Shell population. So that was one of the problem statements. Okay, so I guess the problem statement of having a workforce that's so diverse, and then asking the question, so what? Right? So you're not the same, you're not happy, so what? So I think in one of the challenges around thinking about why is leveraging generations important was looking at the diverse challenges in the world. Right, so in the energy sector, I think all of these plays up to us a lot. Right? Natural disasters, we have typhoons, we have snow, we have other storms. It actually impacts energy, right? Impacts the way in which we move energy across the world. So that definitely is a problem. Social demographic evolution, where we have any big issues in any country, that's also an issue for us because we work closely with the government and countries. If they're shut down in terms of any of the issues, there's a big problem as well in terms of energy. Market volatility. So I don't have to talk too much about this, but that definitely creates issues. And then a lot of times, in terms of unrest, social political changes, those are things that we have to deal with. So all these changes are fast moving, right? It happens all the time. And the way in which we in Shell have always dealt with this, and I have to admit, in this group, that we're not always very good in terms of communicating. This big Shell giant, moving to communicate what is our stance in terms of, political challenges, what's our stand in terms of energy, etc. So I think there's a realization as well that many of these are not just just like what Jen had said. It's about communication. Yeah, how do you communicate? Who's your audience? And what is it that they want to hear? Right. So this is the world that we live in. Diverse challenges, and what do we have internally? Diverse groups of people. Right. So this is the problem statement, and the internal problem statement is actually reflecting the diverse external issues. Okay. So what I thought I'll do is perhaps talk about not so much the difference. I've highlighted the difference, but talk a little bit about how do we actually enable a culture where you can work on the differences and create some similarities, right? So these are the 3 things. Okay, cross-sharing. I'll talk a bit more about employee DNA and also about success, how we celebrate success. Okay, a question. Can you imagine a world where you can't do online shopping? Ladies? I think even for the men, right? Can you imagine a world where you can't buy your electronic products, anything that you need to, just by the click of a button? You can't imagine it now, right? I can't imagine it. Can you imagine a world, where you can actually buy something without actually seeing what you bought, right? Or not knowing how much it costs, etc. So this is an example of cross-sharing and learning. And if I share this example, you go like, well, okay, Shell is just pretty backwards. It took us this long, to get to something of a portal, where our customers can actually see what they are buying. So this is this is actually an example about a new order confirmation portal, right? So what's so special about this? Again, I think I have a colleague who's from Chevron Phillips, and you probably will understand, right? When it comes to selling commodities, it's not very sexy. Yeah? You can hardly put it on the side to say you're buying a pack, of crude oil, or a barrel of crude oil, which location, how much it costs. So it's typically not like that. And then you add on to the fact that a lot of these have issues around refineries, where it's shut down, where it's not. You add on more to that in terms of logistics. So just to get to a portal where you can actually show by customer what type of products they're buying, how much is it, when's the delivery date, and actually get updates in terms of when it's going to be late, if it's late, and how much to be charged, and if it's late, for how long they have to wait. So how do we get to this? So it's actually a collaboration of different groups of people. Yeah, so salespeople are largely in the country. They are usually in their mid-40s, because you have to actually build on some of your capabilities. Most of these people are engineers, so they've gone through school, been engineers, and then come into sales. The customer service people are the ones who take calls and complaints from the customers. These are typically the people who sit in business operations, and they are your Gen Y, right? And then we have the logistics people, who are typically baby boomers. Yeah? These are long-time employees that we have in operations, truck drivers. So you have all these people who have quite some issues and challenges. What we do is we encourage them to provide the challenges from the customer point of view for each of these customers, right? In terms of what is it that we can make it easier for the life of the customer, right? And this is what we came up with: ordering made easy, right? So it doesn't look like a lot, but it's actually really a lot in terms of creating a portal that's easy to use for the customer, so that when we have a conversation with the customer, it's about a good experience and it's not about complaints. So this is one example. And feel free to ask questions or comment as I go through the slides. Okay, these are some attributes in terms of what we encourage in Shell. And I have to say that most of these are started very much in business operations, very much started in terms of the needs of the Gen Y staff to want to communicate ideas, right? To want to be able to have a voice. So a lot of these, in terms of continuous improvement, would be around things that they can do better. I'll share some of that later. And then also about problem solving, having a curiosity to learn. And we have this initiative called Feel Free to Speak My Mind. And I think from a cultural lens as well, that's very important, right? And respect for others. Okay, you can tell from this picture, it was done by me, not the Gen Y. I was putting this together and thinking like, oh no, this looks horrible. But anyway, you get the drift. Visual management. I'm not sure how you know, maybe some of you in this room would be familiar with visual management. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And again, it's something new in Shell, right? When you talk about visual management, the first view that people have is for individuals who do transactions, right? If I'm a professional, I don't need visual management. So what we do here around visual management is really highlight the KPIs, right? The things that can tell you before things go wrong. Yeah, so it's the leading indicators. Yeah, and these are things which anyone, not just the ones doing transactions, can learn from. So this is something which we encourage. Continuous improvement. So you can see here, just around looking at lean methodology. How do we increase yield? And again, these are business topics, right? It is not about a generation of people who want to talk about this, versus professionals, and certain like Gen X or baby boomers who don't need to talk about this. Very much focus on performance and recognition, right? So when things are done well, just like the new confirmation portal, it's celebrated, right? And it's celebrated to highlight sales, logistics, operations, because it's teamwork, right? And we don't hide the fact that these people are different, right? In fact, we highlight that these people are different, right? Different generation, different ideas, different locations. So this is the mindset that we have. Okay, and this example I really like. In terms of curiosity and problem solving, so this is Polish. I don't know what it says, but this has been translated for me. We have what we call moments of truth, and this is about success stories. So this is an example of a customer who called the customer service center and requested that there was a speed lane for ambulance, for refueling, right? So, I mean, it could have been something which the business operations staff or the customer service staff would say, can't help you, but she was curious because that's what we encourage. She actually checked, okay, is this a big problem? Is it something I can do something about? So she's checked and found out that there are 5 stations, right, in that area which the customer had asked about, and actually checked with the territory manager to ask if this could be done. So because she did that, there are actually now priority queues for ambulance to refuel, right? And it's clear signs of helping to save lives. So I think this is a very meaningful one as well, about someone taking the responsibility to do something about it. Okay, I'm going to breeze through this one. Feel free to speak my mind. So this is just about encouraging different generations to have the opportunity to talk to each other. Yep. And respect for others. So we have charity drive. We run a lot of, what we call Earth Watch, where it's about, doing things that are for the environment. And this is really about helping people have respect for things and others, right? Okay, I think the last, we celebrate success together. So again, a lot of times, the vibrancy or celebration, the spontaneity, comes a lot more from the Gen Y stuff. But then I think because of the energy, that a lot of people just get pulled into it, and they want to be part of the excitement, and they want to be part of that success. So this is what we play up a lot in terms of celebrating successes, small ones, big ones as well, right? So this is my story from Shell, and I guess it's back to you, Edward. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We've got about 15 minutes now for questions, but also if anybody wants to share any of their stories, and then we'll have a look at what are our key learnings. So by the way, it's also an opportunity not just for you to ask questions and to share your own story about your organisation, but please feel free to actually share a key learning from both these presentations. Because I think when you think about continuous improvement, and it was good to hear about it, I think we can all learn, and I certainly made lots of notes, not just because I'm the moderator, but because I've learned something today. So any questions of either of our speakers? Yes? Just stand up so people can hear the question. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Shudong Zhang from Stand Chat.